And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I thought I would make a video talking about the archetypes in the Commander format, the most popular ones, because obviously there's essentially an infinite amount of archetypes in the Commander format, because you could just make one up, right? I mean, I don't know if there's an infinite amount, but certainly there is more than I could talk about in one video, so I'm going to be talking about mostly the most popular ones. And I'm doing this because, of course, my channel is EDH Deck Building. It's talking about Commander format, and archetypes is a big part of that. I haven't covered this on my channel really at all in almost 3 years, so I think it is relevant. And I had been looking on EDH Rec because they cover all the archetypes on there and which are the most popular, and I thought there was some interesting things to go over there. So I thought, well, why don't we check out what are the most popular archetypes in the Commander format on EDH Rec and dissect the reason why. So first of all, and again, the main reason why I'm making this video, I think, is because when I looked this up, I saw that the most popular archetype in the format of Commander was artifact decks. And I'm just thinking, I don't know about all that. I mean, first of all, artifact is very vague. It's a little ambiguous. What does it exactly mean? Does it mean I'm playing a Joyra Weatherlight Captain deck where obviously I'm very much, although I would argue that Joyra is a historic commander, it's not necessarily artifact, but obviously that's what everyone's doing with that deck. You know, I'm very specifically playing an artifact theme. Am I playing one of those commanders that is very specifically doing the artifact theme? You know, any commander that cares about having artifacts in play or casting artifacts or whatever, is that the most popular archetype in the Commander format? Geez, I don't think so. You know, I mean, I'm looking at some of the commanders here, and Urtet, Remnant of Memnarch, that's not it, right? Again, I get that Mirror are going to be all artifacts, but if someone is playing an Urtet Remnant of Memnarch deck, would you say they're playing artifact tribal or an artifact deck? I mean, I guess they are, but first of all, the deck's 5 colors, and secondly, it's obviously Mirror tribal. The fact that they just happen to have a lot of artifacts in there, I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily call that the archetype of artifacts. I would call it Mirror tribal. I would call it a tribal deck, right? I mean, we also have Urza Chief Artificer here, right? There's certainly a commander. You know, that's a one that I would certainly consider that. It's doing artifact creature more specifically, but artifact, sure, that is the archetype we're doing there. Again, Brea, Ethereum Shaper, obviously. Artifact theme, no question. Oscar, the Reconstructor, you know, that I would definitely give it to you. Grav's Unstoppable Juggernaut, are we doing an artifact theme there? I don't think so, right? I mean, you probably have a lot of artifacts in the deck. I don't know if I would call that an artifact archetype, though. So I think the stats there are a little bit skewed. I don't know if you could say that artifact is the most popular archetype in the entire Commander format. I don't think so. I mean, it depends what you consider artifact archetype, right? Everyone has artifacts in their deck, certainly. I mean, there are very few decks in the Commander format that don't have any artifacts at all. I have made a couple. It does happen, but it's exceedingly rare. You're going to have Mana Rocks, you're going to have Lightning Greaves and all that stuff. So what actually constitutes an artifact archetype? I would say there's a lot of decks in there that I wouldn't necessarily consider that. Number 2 is treasure token decks. And I mean, how accurate is this? I don't know. Is this just every deck that's doing treasure tokens? Because yes, treasure token decks are super popular in the format, no question. I would absolutely agree. I mean, you have Prosper, one of the most popular commanders in the entire format, but it trails off quickly after that. I mean, Magda, I guess, you know, again, certainly I would call that a treasure token. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe more so dwarf tribal, but nevertheless, it is certainly treasure token archetype. Rashmi and Ragavan, is that treasure token, right? Again, now we're getting a little bit off where it's not really treasure tokens at all. I mean, I will just say in their defense, you know, if you're looking at all the commanders that are just creating treasure tokens, man, have we gotten a ton of those lately, right? There are so many. And even the commanders that just work really good with treasure tokens, like a Korvold, right? So certainly you could very easily make a Korvold deck that is doing treasure tokens because it fits the sacrifice theme. The new Balrog, Durin's Bane, again, same thing, costs 1 less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this turn. So that commander you don't think of as treasures, but you certainly could, right? Jury Master Review, same thing. Another commander that you could easily do treasures with. So there's a broader theme there. There's obviously going to be a lot of Korvold decks out there that aren't doing treasure tokens. There's going to be a lot of Admiral Beckett Brass decks that aren't doing treasure tokens. But then there's probably a lot that you would be doing a lot of treasure tokens, right? That would be a perfect example of one where I look at that commander and I'm like, that's Pirate Tribal, right? but probably because of the pirate, like that's where treasure tokens came from, right? It came from that set and the whole pirate theme. So obviously there's going to be, it's just going to happen in the deck that you're doing a lot of treasure tokens. So again, I think the treasure token statistic here might be a little inflated. I don't think there's that many treasure token commanders in the format. Next up is life gain. And obviously that's a very popular archetype in the format. One that has, it used to be, you could do a mono white life gain deck and then you could do white black. Those were pretty much the only options. You could do mono black, but it was kind of tough to do a mono black life gain theme and get a lot of benefit off of it. Now, as I've said many times, I have a Patron of the Kitsune mono white life gain deck that used to be a little fringe, but as I just talked about in, the cards that I'm taking out of my decks now, Dawn of Hope is a card I just took out of that deck because, and that's one of the reasons I put the deck together in the first place is like, okay, white has a little bit of difficulty drawing cards. There's a great card draw option for a mono white life gain deck. And so, of course, it was one of the first cards that went in there, and now I don't need it anymore because not only does white draw cards really well, but there's so much support just in mono white life gain that you just would have a hard time trying to fit stuff like Dawn of Hope in there. And if you're doing a black-white life gain deck, oh my goodness, it's getting even harder. And then if you're doing a Bilbo Birthday Celebrant deck, which is doing, because of course they've incorporated black and green, right? There's a ton of great green stuff in the life gain theme now. So I don't even know what you would put in that deck, right? Bilbo Birthday Celebrant, of course, the Abzan life gain commander now. How many options do you have there? You have all the white stuff, all the black and green stuff, all the green and white stuff even. There's a few of that. Like you could put a Lathiel in that deck very easily. There is obviously all of the black and white stuff, which, is a lot of really, really great stuff there. I would say probably that's the most obvious when it comes to, a life gain archetype in Commander. You're going to see a lot of black-white decks. For sure. So if I'm combining the black and white with the green and black and, all of that, there's so much to work with there that it's not even funny. I guess the only non-options there would be the blue and the red. That making an Izzet life gain deck would definitely be difficult. It's an interesting challenge there for sure. Is it the third most popular archetype in the entire format? Well, maybe. It's hard to say. It certainly is a popular one. I mean, I myself, I sort of play fringe strategies and underwhelming commanders, and I myself have a life gain deck. So there you go. Next up, we have +1/+1 counters. And again, I don't think anyone's surprised that this is a popular archetype in the format. I would say that, man, even if this was the most popular, it wouldn't surprise me. We just got another Commander Omarthus Ghostfire Initiate from the Commander Masters colorless deck that is doing +1/+1 counters. And like I said, when I talked about that in the review of that set, I mean, it's a little different, but again, something happens and I put a +1/+1 counter on my commander. How many commanders are there already that this thing happens and I put a counter on it? I mean, there are so many. If we're talking about a deck where I'm actually in that archetype, whether I'm building around +1/+1 counters or I have a commander that is putting +1/+1 counters on itself, right? I would consider that to be like, if I have that trigger, like certainly Omarthus would be that, but maybe like Shalai and Halar, right? If whenever one or more +1 counters are put on a creature you control, right? You're not putting +1/+1 counters on your commander there, but you are certainly doing that in the deck. That is certainly that archetype. Atraxa Praetor's Voice. Obviously, not every deck out there is doing +1/+1 counter themes with Atraxa, but a whole lot are. It would be one of the most popular archetypes, right? Atraxa is doing Infect a lot of times, and it's doing Super Friends, and it's doing +1/+1 counters. Those are the big three with Atraxa, at least from what I've seen. So there's a lot of commanders out there that I'm just putting +1/+1 counters on my commander every time this thing happens, like Azmira, Holy Avenger, right? There's a commander that I did on my normal commanders videos a long, long time ago that, a lot of people might not even consider when talking about this, but that certainly is, even though you're not doing a ton of +1/+1 counter stuff, you're certainly doing it because you're piling those counters on your commander. So to me, +1/+1 counters, I would imagine, is probably the most popular theme just because there's just so many commanders that are doing it. Next up, equipment. So this is the, according to EDHREC, the fifth most popular archetype in the commander format. And again, not a huge surprise. There's a ton of commanders that are certainly doing it, right? Again, we have the new Nahiri, we have Sir Gwyn, which is, I think, likely the most popular equipment commander in the entire format. Ardennes, though, oh man, I don't know. That one's coming on strong. If you're looking at the partner pairings, that might be... Ardennes actually might have more decks than Sir Gwyn. I mean, obviously, the commonality there is cheating the equip costs. Galea, Kindler of Hope, right? Tetsuo, Imperial Champion. There's a bunch of commanders that are obviously very specifically doing the equipment theme, and they come out with new ones all the time. But how many of them are, again, how many are they considering here that aren't specifically doing it? Like I see Zergo Helm Smasher here, which there's nothing about equipment on this commander at all. However, it is very obviously a Voltron commander, right? So how many Voltron commanders would be included in the equipment archetype? Because they obviously use it a lot, right? Zergo Helm Smasher, you're going to be attacking with it a lot. You're going to be wanting to get in for commander damage. It's, I would say, one of the OG Voltron commanders. Don't really see it much anymore. And certainly you're going to want to put equipment on it. So yeah, I guess I would probably include that in there. Again, for me, I would say that's more a Voltron strategy than an equipment strategy. Although the Voltron strategy and the equipment strategy, there's a lot of overlap there, with the Venn diagram. Certainly fifth most popular archetype in the format. Oh, okay, sure. Next up, we got Aristocrats, and this one can get a little bit tricky for sure. And as I get down this list, we will see why. Aristocrats specifically mean, and again, Aristocrats was a archetype created back in, Standard a long time ago. I can't remember which block exactly, but you had, Cartel Aristocrat, Falconrith Aristocrat. Those two cards, which were both sack outlets. Why would you want to be sacrificing your creatures all the time? Well, it has that Blood Artist win con, right? That, to me, is the definer of an Aristocrat strategy over just a regular sacrifice strategy, right? An Aristocrat strategy is Blood Artist or Blood Artist type of effects are my win con. Zulaport Cutthroat. Whenever my creature dies, I drain my opponent. That is the go-to win con in my deck. For me, that's what it is. That is the defining characteristic of an Aristocrats deck. My win con is the Blood Artist effect. So when I see Teysa Karlov, I'm like, okay, is that what people do there? I think certainly you could, because you're getting the double triggers. If I see a Marin of Clan Nel Toth, I'm like, is that what people do with that deck? You're certainly sacrificing your creatures a lot because you want the dice triggers. I don't know if a lot of people put Blood Artist in their Marin decks. I mean, you certainly could. I think there's better things you could be doing there with your Marin than that. Certainly. I don't know, like a typical Marin deck that I've seen, and I've played against hundreds. I don't think I've ever seen one that I would consider an Aristocrats deck. So I don't know. Like you could, certainly. Again, black and green is not the typical colors. I would say black and white. It doesn't matter. You could do a blue and red Aristocrats deck if you wanted to. However, white and black for sure is the typical Aristocrats colors. Again, you look at Elis Ilkor, Sadistic Pilgrim. There's a commander that I'm sure a lot of people might have even already had an Aristocrats deck and just swapped this guy out. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life, which, of course, if you're an Aristocrats deck, you're going to have lots of creatures entering the battlefield, probably mostly tokens. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses one life. So there you go. That is the Blood Artist effect stapled on your commander. So that's why, if I already had an Aristocrats deck, and again, black and white are probably the best colors for that, Elis Ilkor, that's why that guy skyrocketed in popularity in the format, because he very easily could be the commander for one of those decks because he's your win con. That is what you're doing in that deck, right? So, again, Yawgmoth Thran Physician, certainly you could be doing that. You could be doing a lot of other things with that commander, but you certainly could be doing the Aristocrats thing. I would say more Ayara first of Loch Thwain. Again, there's the, I'm doing that on my commander anyway, although interestingly enough, Ayara is doing it a little bit differently, where now it is my black creature entering the battlefield that's doing that Blood Artist effect. And also I have the sacrifice on my commander. So obviously I want to be So I would imagine, again, 90 or 95% of Ayara decks are doing the Blood Artist thing, the Aristocrats thing, even though your commander is getting the ETB Blood Artist trigger. So it is slightly different, although I would say you're likely doing that in the deck anyway. Certainly a popular archetype in the format, without a doubt. Next up, interestingly enough, we have Token. So again, just a token strategy, which, again, sort of like the artifact thing, it's like, okay, well, where does this fit, right? If I take a treasure tokens obviously are incredibly popular in the format. If I'm talking about treasure tokens, well, that's an artifact theme because they're artifacts. It's also obviously fits into the treasure token archetype because it's doing that. It's also in a sacrifice archetype because, of course, you sacrifice them. And obviously, it's in the token archetype because it's a token. So again, how much is that actually fitting? So you have the token theme and you have the treasure theme. And again, the Venn diagram, there's a big overlap there, I would imagine, right? When I'm thinking about the token theme, typically you're thinking about the creature token theme, right? And again, I'm looking at the most popular commanders in this archetype, Jetmir Nexus of Revels. And this is an interesting one because, again, you're looking at this commander and there's nothing to do with tokens here at all, right? However, it's likely that's what people are doing because you just want lots of creatures in play. Again, just like with the Aristocrats theme, where an Aristocrats theme is going to be playing a lot of tokens because you want to be sacrificing your creatures, and the easiest way to crank out creatures or just get a whole bunch in play is with that spell that just creates a whole bunch of tokens all at once. That's the best way to do it. With a Jetmir, same thing. I just want lots of creatures in play. I don't want to sacrifice them. I just want them to exist in play so that my commander gives me all those abilities. And the easiest way to do that is with tokens. You don't have to do tokens with Jetmir at all, but certainly maybe the best way to go with Jetmir is that. And it's funny that a commander that doesn't reference tokens in the slightest is one of the most popular in the entire format with that theme. So it's kind of funny how it works out sometimes. Obviously, we have Marnius Calgar, the obvious ones, right? The ones that you specifically want to be doing that and nothing else, right? I have a Benny Brax deck. Obviously, that's a token theme, without a doubt. It would be pretty silly for me to do anything else in that deck. Your commander has a great ability that draws you cards from creating tokens. Marnius Calgar, same thing. So obviously that's what you're going to be doing. Chatterfang, same thing. Your commander's not really doing a whole lot if you're not creating tokens. Like I said, when that commander first came out, a lot of people were like, hey, Squirrel Tribal Commander, and you could. Certainly, you could do just Squirrel Tribal because, of course, squirrels are very heavy in the token theme already. A lot of overlap there with tokens and squirrels, so it's easy to do so it works with your commander. But, you know, I made a Chatterfang deck on my channel that wasn't doing squirrel tokens at all because it's just fantastic value. I create a treasure token and I get a squirrel as well. So that's, again, one of the most popular commanders in the entire format, and that's why. Adrix and Nev, very obviously a token theme. Mondrak, very obviously a token theme. For me, if I'm thinking about the token theme, I'm thinking about two things. I'm thinking about a commander that creates tokens. That's obviously a token theme, right? So Brutaclad, again, I would say that's probably artifact theme, sure, but certainly it's a token theme. You're creating them. You want more tokens that you can turn into those things that you're creating and all that. Certainly that's a token theme without a question. And also the Benny Brax, Marnius Calgar commanders that are giving you some benefit from creating tokens as well, right? So that's a whole lot, right? That's a whole lot of commanders. So again, I'm actually surprised tokens is that low. And again, even the Jetmir decks where I'm not specifically doing tokens, but it just works really good. So yeah, for me, token is got to be probably higher than where it is on here anyway. +1/+1 counters and tokens. Just look at the commanders that are doing that or want you to be doing that. To me, those are probably, if you asked me, what are the most popular archetypes in the entire format, I would say tokens and +1/+1 counters in whichever order. Next up, and this one's a little surprising. Again, remember, we just talked about tokens in the Commander format, hugely popular. Wheels is next. So wheel decks, and obviously wheel is in reference to Wheel of Fortune, the first card and the most infamous one doing this. But, you know, Windfall, you have lots of cards that do stuff like that. You want everyone to draw and you want everyone to discard. And of course, the first commander everyone thinks of here is Nekusar, which is really one of the best commander designs, I think, ever. You know, the commander design where I want to benefit my opponents, but I'm hurting them in the same way. It's just a great design because your opponents are like, oh, I get to draw a bunch of cards. That's nice, but it's hitting me for damage. You know, it puts them in a confusing situation. Really great commander. As I just talked about a little while ago, it still is the most popular Grixis commander. Grixis is one of the most popular color combinations in the whole entire format. And Nekusar is the most popular Grixis commander still. And this guy came out in Commander 2013. That was a long time ago, obviously, right? Really great design. And obviously that would be driving this archetype. It's the most popular commander here, although we got Shieldred, okay? And then now, again, it's getting a little, okay, we're talking about wheels here, right? Shieldred the Apocalypse is a mono black commander. Obviously, again, skyrocketed in popularity in the format. Is there any wheels in that deck? Dark Deal would be the only card in that deck that I would consider to be a wheel. So now we're getting a little sketchy here with whether or not this is a wheel deck or not. We're not going to have any actual Wheels of Fortune in here. We're not going to have Windfall, right? 90% of those effects that do that, maybe even 99% of the effects that actually do, right? When I talk about a wheel, talking about Wheel of Fortune, so you have to do something like that. You have to do a draw discard. Sheoldred the Apocalypse, the only card that it has access to that is doing something like that is Dark Deal, that I'm aware of. I don't think there's any others. So are you going to call, like, I don't know if it's possible to make a deck with Sheoldred that could be called that. I mean, I guess you could use the colorless option. So Memory Jar, there you go. There's a colorless option that's doing that. Teferi's Puzzle Box, okay. I'm starting to find them. Again, there are a few. But again, is Teferi's Puzzle Box a wheel effect? I guess it kind of is. Yeah, Memory Jar is definitely a wheel effect. Teferi's Puzzle Box, okay. I don't know. It's a stretch. Would anyone out there call Sheoldred a wheel deck? I don't know if I would call it that. It certainly is wanting you to draw cards. You want your opponents to draw cards and you. So any wheel effect is phenomenal here, but you don't have access to that many in mono black, right? That's why I think for a lot of people, they're surprised how popular this commander is. Heliod the Radiant Dawn, again, is right up at the top here, or the backside. Heliod the Warped Eclipse is the side that you want that to be happening. Again, I don't know if wheeling is necessarily, like, again, now you're in blue, so you do have the Windfall and some of those effects. You do want your opponents to draw cards. Again, I'm not sure if I would call this a wheel deck. When I made the deck for my channel, I didn't really do that at all. I don't think it's super necessary to be doing that a lot. Prosperity, right? Prosperity that's not a wheel effect, right? So we're not in, like, that's why I don't know if I would consider this a wheel deck, because who considers Prosperity to be a wheel card? It's not. It's just drawing, right? That's what you want in your Helio decks. Again, it's kind of what you want in the Sheoldred decks too. The discarding part doesn't really work a whole lot here. You just want lots of card draw. So I cast a Prosperity, everyone draws, and then my stuff costs a lot less. Again, I think there might be some decks in here where it's like, I don't know if I would consider that a wheel deck, like the Alenda and Azor, which just came out. At the beginning of each end step, you may pay 4 life if you do create a number of 1/1 black vampire knights with lifelink equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn. Is anyone wheeling in this deck? I don't know. Like, if you are, I think that's not a great option here. I don't know. I mean, again, there's a few options, not a ton. I wouldn't consider this. Is anyone looking at this commander and going, that's a wheel commander? I don't think so. Again, this to me more fits into the token creation than anything else, right? Or possibly even the life gain. But certainly the token creation theme, I think this fits more than it does the wheel theme. So I think that wheeling might be a little artificially higher than it should be here. Next up, we have Spellslinger, and this is one that certainly is popular in the Commander format without a doubt. Again, I would wonder what they are calling a Spellslinger deck. Traditionally, the Spellslinger theme, would translate to instant and sorcery. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, this thing happens. Instant and sorcery, this or that. Obviously, Niv Mizzet, I think, would probably be the big boss in that archetype. Funny enough, I'm not seeing it here on the page. And Hello the Painter is the one that I'm seeing the most. The first instant and sorcery spell you cast each turn has casualty 2. So certainly, instant and sorcery theme, Spellslinger commander, no question. Anytime you see a commander that says instant or sorcery or instant and sorcery, Spellslinger commander, without a doubt. I guess you could go a different way with it, but why would you, right? Izzet colors, for sure, are the Spellslinger colors. And if you look at the Izzet commanders, again, Veyran, I already talked about Niv Mizzet, Vadrek, Astral Archmage, Mizzix of the Is Magnus, which is sort of the OG, Magnus the Red. I mean, just go down the list. Gandalf the Grey, which just came out in Lord of the Rings. It is dominated, Izzet colors, with the Spellslinger theme. One of the reasons I don't have an Izzet deck is it's hard to make an Izzet deck where you're not doing that. Not just the commanders, but also the cards in the 99 as well. Right? A lot of Izzet cards are doing that. Grixis, I would say, is second. There's a lot of Grixis commanders that are doing that. Kessa, again, another Grixis commander that obviously is very much doing that. We just got Lord of the Nazgul, which is a really good Dimir one. And I know people really like this commander for that Spellslinger theme. It's a great one, for sure. I would argue that it's going to be really tough to get to the 9, right? The 9 Nazgul in play. You can do it, certainly. I would say if I was going to build a Spellslinger deck, I would go Izzet for sure. Probably Grixis second. And Lord of the Nazgul fits in the Grixis ones, obviously. But if you were doing a Dimir one, again, there are a lot there as well. And the Lord of the Nazgul is certainly a great one. Outside of the Grixis colors, it gets really, really tough. You could do a little bit with the Jeskai, and I just talked about this with my Staples video. All the Jeskai commanders are doing the non-creature thing, which again is not necessarily like, I guess that is Spellslinger, sure. I don't know, like non-creature means I'm doing artifacts and enchantments now. So is artifacts and enchantments Spellslinger, right? So that's where it sort of gets sort of gummed up. A Spellslinger is, to me specifically, instant and sorceries. I wouldn't consider enchantments or artifacts to be Spellslingers. Again, we've already gone over the artifact archetype. So how are you going to include that, right? So when you look at the Jeskai commanders, they're not really doing Spellslinger. They're doing non-creature. And non-creature for me is not Spellslinger. I know instants and sorceries are included in there, but you're casting enchantments, artifacts, planeswalkers. Is that Spellslinger? No, it's not, right? So again, there's no hard line. It doesn't really matter that much. You know, this is just for discussion purposes. To me, though, the Jeskai commanders that do the non-creature thing, I don't know if I would necessarily consider them a Spellslinger. All right, let's move on to the lands theme. And again, this for me is one that's going to be, I think, probably a lot higher. The lands theme, landfall, whatever you want to call it, right? We go into the Gitrog decks where you're doing the landfall thing, but you're also doing the sacrifice. You know, again, Lord Windgrace. I'm doing I get it back from my graveyard. We have Borborygmos and Fibblethip, which I just did a deck where I'm like, I actually don't think that's the lands theme, but clearly a lot of people are doing that. So the people that are doing, right, the deck I made, I would not consider that in the lands archetype. A lot of people are doing a Borborygmos and Fibblethip deck, though, that is in the lands archetype, certainly. And you would not be in the wrong to do so, right? I would also probably include Hazazon Shaper of Sand here. You are doing the desert theme, which of course deserts are lands. So yeah, obviously that's in the land theme. I just talked about Omnath Locus of Creation on a 5 unique builds video where, yes, you're doing the landfall theme there, but I think that would make a really interesting life gain commander. So again, that, you know, if you did that deck, that would fit in the life gain theme. Certainly though, it is really hard to avoid doing the landfall theme with a commander. I mean, you're playing lands in every game. That's the thing about the landfall theme. Every deck is playing lands. So if I'm doing an Omnath Locus of Creation deck and I'm trying to avoid doing the landfall theme, it's pretty difficult to do so because my commander has a landfall trigger and I'm guaranteed to be playing lands in every game. So it's pretty hard to get away from it, right? So obviously any commander that is mentioning lands on it is going to fall into this theme. And then again, you have the really obvious stuff, right? The Tatyova, which is very clearly, I mean, again, I don't know how you can not do a lands theme there. Your commander's giving you this fantastic trigger off of playing lands or just having lands enter the battlefield. You have the ones like Zimonin Dyna where, okay, now we're getting a little sketchy with whether or not we're in a lands theme here. You are sacrificing another creature, draw a card, and then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. Repeat this process if you have 8 or more lands. Okay. The fact that your commander is referencing lands not once but twice, okay, I guess we could include that in the lands archetype. Again, when I built the deck, I didn't really do a lands archetype there much at all. You know, for me, I'm thinking a land archetype is, again, you're doing that either that maze deck or the desert deck or something that is very obviously a lands theme. The Tatyova deck were very obviously a lands theme, or I'm doing a recursion theme from my graveyard, right? Like Gitrog or Lord Windgrace. Or, and I will just throw out a fringe one that I would consider possibly a lands theme, like a Cosima, for example. That is, you know, if you're playing the front, that is, I would say, obviously a lands theme. You know, the deck I made on my channel certainly is a lands theme. It's hard to do in mono blue, but I play a Parallax Tide, right? That's one of the cards I put in that deck so that I can blink my lands. They come back into play, right? Because your Cosima essentially has a landfall trigger when it's exiled, right? Maluko the Clouded Mirror, another mono blue commander that I would certainly put in the Cosima deck. That is another commander that you look at it and you're like, you don't really think of it right away, but certainly it's a lands theme. You're returning lands to your hand. So you're going to put a bunch of stuff in there that is, you know, maybe like the Walking Atlas that is putting lands into play. You know, landfall triggers work really really good there. So I would say, it's not entirely a lands theme, but Maluka the Clouded Mirror certainly is a commander that fits in the lands archetype. And again, this is one that I would think would be a lot higher. For me, +1/+1 counters, then tokens, then landfall theme. That's, I think, probably the most popular archetypes in the format. And I'm going to do one more here. Again, I could keep going for pretty much ever. Sacrifice theme comes in next. And again, this is one where I'm like, okay. And they have Mayhem Devil here, which obviously is going to fit in that archetype and obviously is also a black-red card. So how is this separate from the Aristocrats theme? Obviously, the Aristocrats theme is sacrificing, right? Again, the treasure token theme is sacrificing. There's a lot of commanders like a Jury that is, okay, that's certainly a sacrifice theme, no question. Is it an Aristocrats theme though? Maybe, maybe not. Is it a treasure token theme? Maybe, maybe not, because you could do the treasure token theme as well. Maybe it's all three. It certainly is a sacrifice theme, right? If I'm just thinking not treasure token necessarily, not Aristocrats necessarily, I'm just thinking sacrifice archetype in the commander format, I'm going to the black-red commanders, right? The Rakdos commanders, for which there are a bunch in that theme, and obviously a bunch of cards in that theme. But of course, the King of the Mountain is going to be Korvald, right? Korvald, which is a Jund commander, is the, and as far as benefiting you from sacrificing it, it doesn't get much better than sacrifice a permanent to draw card. And as I've told the story before on my channel, when I first saw the commander, right? When you first see Korvald, I know it seems crazy to talk about this now, but when people first saw that commander, they didn't go, "Oh my God, it's busted. It's so good. It's too good. It shouldn't even be played in a casual game." No, I saw it and I was like, oh, sacrifice. I was thinking of interesting things I could do with sacrificing a permanent, and I did the treasure token, clue token theme, because I'm like, oh, clue tokens you sacrifice, and treasure tokens you sacrifice, and there was no Adrix and Nev, there was no, there wasn't a lot of good clue commanders, there wasn't any clue commanders at the time, and I was looking for a good clue commander, and then I supplemented that with the treasure token theme, and again, back then, treasure tokens weren't super busted. They were pretty rare in the format. So it was crazy to think about it now, but it was a pretty janky theme originally when I made my Korvald sacrifice treasure and investigate, clue token deck. Obviously, by today's standards, we all know it's busted because people learned very quickly that, hey, I'm just going to crack my fetch land, which again, I would already do in my deck anyway. And I just happen to get a card draw off of it, right? So a lot of people out there probably made a Korvald deck and then they go to crack their Evolving Wilds and like, oh, hey, I just sacrificed a permanent. I guess I got a card draw after that. And people quickly realized how busted that ability is. Again, I'm going to make a video at some point about bad commander design. And this is really a bad commander design because giving you a benefit off of just incidentally doing things, right? Again, Tatyova is probably my least favorite commander ever because it's just horrible commander design. Like I just said in this video, I'm playing lands anyway. It's impossible for me to not draw cards off of my Tatyova. Like, you made a commander where not only is it easy to draw cards, it's impossible not to. Korvald, same thing. I'm doing the things I would normally do in a deck anyway, and wouldn't you know it, I'm just drawing a bunch of cards off of my commander. So poor commander design, in my opinion. But I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent. Obviously, the sacrifice theme, again, a lot of overlap there, right? Treasure tokens, or a token theme in general, right? There's a lot of overlap with the Venn diagram there. An interesting one I see here is Smeagol Helpful Guide from Lord of the Rings. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died under your control this turn, the ring tempts you. So, okay, again, certainly you would be sacrificing creatures with that commander in order to guarantee that trigger. Yeah, okay. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, Sakur Tribe-Eldar. Great card, obviously in any commander deck, but in my Smeagol deck, I play my Sakur Tribe-Eldar. I sacrifice it because I want to ramp anyway. I'm already doing that in my deck. I'm going to put Sakur Tribe-Eldar in any green deck regardless. But in this deck, now on the end step, I get that trigger. So I'm using a card that I would normally use to go get a land anyway to get the trigger off my commander. but I am sacrificing it. So is that the sacrifice theme? I mean, okay, maybe, maybe not. This one for sure, I think, is iffy, and that is Slimefoot and Squee, right? When Slimefoot and Squee enters the battlefield or attacks, create a 1/1 green Saproling creature token. So we're in the Saproling, possibly tribal theme here, and certainly we're in the token creation theme here as well. Although you're just creating a token when your commander enters the battlefield or attacks. So if you're not doing any other token creation theme, that's a little iffy as far as the token creation theme here. But we're talking about sacrifice, right? Pay 1 black, green, and a red, sacrifice a Saproling to return Slimefoot and Squee and up to 1 other target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, you know, again, that is a sacrifice on my commander. So of course it's a sacrifice theme. Is it? I don't know. I don't know if I would consider this a sacrifice theme. Again, when I think sacrifice commander, I think jury. I'm putting a bunch of stuff in this deck I want to sacrifice. Or I think of a commander that I want to sacrifice stuff to. Whisper, right? That's a sacrifice commander, certainly, because I want to be sacrificing stuff to it to use its ability. When I look at Slimefoot and Squee, I'm not thinking of a sacrifice. I'm thinking recursion. The way I'm building this deck is I'm putting stuff in the deck that I can cheat into play, get out of my graveyard. That's the build around here. The build around here is not I'm looking for stuff to sacrifice because I can only sacrifice a Saproling and my commander's already making one, right? So that's what I'm talking about where, you know, maybe the archetype, a little iffy here with, you know, and I'm not poo-pooing on EDH Rec here necessarily. I love that site. I use it all the time. I'm using it right now. But I'm just saying, as far as their ranking with the archetypes go, I don't know. It's a little iffy. Again, I'm looking at Mill, which is farther down the list as far as archetypes go, and the card they're showing me is Skull Prophet. Okay, so we're including Self-Mill in there, because obviously Skull Prophet is put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. So if we're talking about the Mill archetype, again, if I'm talking to anyone and I say, you know, the Mill archetype, how popular is that in the commander format? You know, should I be putting an Elixir of Immortality or better version, a Campfire in my deck because my opponents are going to be milling me, you know? And I ask a bunch of commander players, how popular is that strategy? They might say, it's not that popular. It used to be more popular. Not so much anymore, right? Used to see those Phoenix decks all the time. I don't see them anymore. But we're including Self-Mill in here, right? So now the Marin decks are going to be included in the Mill strategy. So I don't know about that, right? I would not, if I was talking about the Mill archetype in the commander format, I would not be including Self-Mill because Self-Mill decks are graveyard strategy. Right? That's how I would include it. And again, graveyard, where's that on this list? I mean, I don't even see it. Oh, it's way down there. Okay. So, and again, graveyard for me is one of the most popular entire format because not only do you have the very obvious stuff like, again, the Marin decks, which are certainly a graveyard, you know, any recursion, the Whisper again, obviously that's a graveyard deck as well. Lots of overlap, certainly. You know, your Whisper deck fits into the sacrifice theme. It fits into the recursion theme. It fits in, you know, graveyard deck, recursion theme, the same thing. But also, graveyard decks are the Gitrog deck. Certainly the Gitrog deck I would call a graveyard deck because, I mean, usually the win con in that deck with Dakmar Salvage that's the graveyard thing, right? Certainly I would call a Gitrog deck a graveyard deck. Lord Windgrace as well I would call a graveyard deck because you're doing lots of shenanigans with your graveyards. So Kess, again, Spellslinger deck, no question, but it's also a graveyard deck. You know, it's how you build your deck. If I'm building a Kess deck, I'm putting Entomb in there. Or a Lore Mage, I'm certainly putting in there. Super underplayed card in the format. Because I'm going to fetch instants and sorceries out of my library and chuck them in my graveyard so I can cast them with my Kess. So that certainly is, even though you would consider it a Spellslinger deck, it is certainly a graveyard deck as well, right? So I think graveyard should be way higher as well. Again, for me, if I'm thinking the most popular archetypes in the entire format, I'm thinking token strategies, I'm thinking +1/+1 counters, I'm thinking land or landfall strategies, and I'm thinking graveyard strategies. Those are the ones I'm thinking of. Again, I'd say all the time, like, what do you need in your deck, guys? We need graveyard hate for sure, because there's so many decks that are taking advantage of their graveyard. We need stuff that hates on lands, right? As much as people don't like it, you do need it. Put that Ghost Quarter in your deck. You're absolutely going to need it against that lands deck. It might not help a lot. In fact, against that Gitrog deck, it might actually be helping them, but you still need it, right? You got to have those things in your commander decks because that's the kind of stuff we see all the time in the format, right? So I don't know, just an interesting video I thought I would make about the different archetypes. Again, I was just looking on EDH Rec and I was like, artifact #1 archetype. I don't know about that. I mean, again, that for me, I'm thinking there might be some overlap with just I play artifacts in my deck, which of course almost every single commander deck does, right? I mean, everyone's got a soul ring and that's an artifact. So how much of that is going on? I don't know. You guys let me know in the comments below what you think or what the most popular archetypes for you are, the ones you encounter all the time. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.